Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Geek Warning Podcast from the Escape Collective, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know this week in the world of bicycle tech. We've got an especially spicy episode for you today, and thankfully, we've got our full crew on hand to tackle it. I'm James Huang here in Boulder, Colorado. Over in Sydney, Australia is senior tech editor and resident tool fanatic Dave Rome. Hi, Dave.
Hello, James.
And normally I'd say up in Ireland, but Ronan, you're actually over in Girona, Spain at the moment. You are our... I think we're just going to call you our Chief Optimization Officer, our COO. How does that sound?
COO usually refers to someone with a high pay packet. So if that's going to reflect my pay, I'm happy to go with that, yes.
Perfect. That sounds excellent. How's everybody doing today?
Good.
That was very convincing.
The two of you are two opposite ends of the hair length spectrum right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Ronan gave himself too much of a haircut, and I just need one. So together we have average length hair.
Excellent. Dave, for people who do not follow you on Instagram for whatever crazy reason, talk to me about high precision Allen wrenches for small little hex head bolts.
Well, I think that's something we covered in a recent podcast. But yeah, it's there's now a post explaining it. So yeah, it's the RC remote control cars, and Plain World offers some incredibly highly precise tools. And I found myself down that rabbit hole. And yeah, you can listen back to a few episodes ago where we did discuss it. It was on my mind. But otherwise, yeah, my Instagram page has also got the answers.
Dave, you've got a bunch of very expensive rabbit holes.
Yes. Thankfully, I don't need to eat too often.
Well, thankfully, you're our CTO, our Chief Tools Officer, with a similarly high salary to go along with that heady.
Oh, that sounds great.
With that heady title. Yeah, there you go.
Wow.
I'm gonna have to figure out
fantastic.
a C something. Yeah, I'm gonna have to figure out a C something O title for me. Ronan, as I mentioned, you are in Girona. Can we talk about what you're doing there, and what you're seeing there that you may be able to see or talk about or write about soon?
I actually don't think I can.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Clothing is probably as far as I can go.
Something clothing related, something bicycling related.
Bicycle clothing related.
Okay. We'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, that's a bit. I hate doing this teasing, but I'm sworn to secrecy right now. As soon as I can, okay. I will tell all.
I mean, Ronan is right now in a dark box. I actually can't see his face because all the lights are off. So he's in some sort of quarantine situation.
I'm here. I promise I'm here.
Well, as I mentioned, we've got a hot topic to talk about today. We've mentioned on several previous past episodes now that we really need to dig into the various kind of issues and concerns, I guess you could say, regarding hookless, road tubeless wheels and tires. And well, today is that day. Ronan, can you set the stage here? Why are we talking about this now?
We're talking about this now specifically because it's become an increasing issue this year, let's say, and that is to do with tubeless straight sidewall, which a lot of us will know as hookless, and the specific tires for those hookless rims effectively blowing off the rims. And there's been several examples of that happening this year. And to be clear, this is actually hookless specific tires blowing off hookless rims. So it's not like it's not using a standard tube type or hookless crochet type tire. It's a tire that is designed for hookless rim blowing off hookless rims. And one of the primary reasons that I've identified for it is that the update to the ISO standards last year that effectively said you cannot mount anything smaller than a 29mm stated width tire on a 25mm wide internal rim has been ignored in some cases, and teams have mounted 28mm tires on these rims, and we believe that's been causing part of the issue.
All right, let's back up just a little bit here, because you did just write a very detailed, very well-written article up on escapecollective.com that everyone should check out if they haven't already. And
judging by the comments,
I guess there was one
pretty much everybody on the planet has checked it out. There's been that many of them.
Yeah. True. But you were talking about, I guess, one specific incident recently really kind of raised the red flag for you, right?
It didn't. This is something I had been looking into previously, but last Friday, Thomas de Gendt had a very nasty looking crash. Lucky not to come away with serious injuries, or, especially lucky when you've seen the way he crashed. A concussion was kind of the first thing you thought of. He passed concussion testing and finished the stage with the help of his compatriots at Sudal Quickstep, who had given him a different front wheel because Thomas de Gendt's team car happened to be ahead of him in the race, servicing the breakaway. And it's important to clarify that, because there's been a lot of question marks since, well, how did he end up on a zip rear wheel and a Roval front wheel? And that was effectively how. But what happened to him was, what happened in the aftermath was that his bike was laying against a roadside barrier. The front tire had, completely blown off the rim on one side, the drive side. The foam liner that he had within that tire was also blown off the rim. It seemed to be snapped. So, instead of being one circular foam liner, it seemed to be snapped in two. It's unclear if that was cut before it was put into the tire to help with inserting, or if it was broken because of the crash. That's unclear. But what did become clear was, through confirmation with the team, we now know that he was running a 28mm tire, stated on the sidewall 28. That's not how it would have measured, but that's how it was stated on the sidewall of the tire. It's a 28mm, and he was riding Zip 353 NSW rims, which have on the front a 25mm internal rim width. And getting back to what I was saying earlier about that mismatch in terms of what the ISO standards say, you cannot have a 28mm tire on a 25mm internal rim. Now, Zip's compatibility chart says that you can, but they sort of predate the ISO standards, and that's kind of where a lot of confusion has come from. What we don't know, and sort of this is what I had been looking into prior to the Gendt's accident, was we don't know what pressure he had in them. We don't know for sure if he hit something or not. He seemed to think that he had hit something, and he was asking on Twitter, "Did anybody see what I hit?" We don't know, was there some other factors at play, but what we do know, and what the point of that article was, is that by the new ISO standards, his rim and tire technically are not what they recommend, are not compatible.
Dave, were you going to add something?
I was going to say, we also don't know the conditions of installation, like whether perhaps, whether maybe the mechanic was using tire levers and damaged the bead in the process with that tire liner in place. So, I mean, there are some certain unknowns here, but regardless, it's not a one-off incident that we're talking about. We've seen other blow-offs of related wheel and tire combos this season, and I mean, it's just flat out terrifying.
The other examples that I have seen, it's worth noting that the other examples I have seen, although not confirmed by the team, are seemingly also running 28mm stated width tires on 25mm internal rim width wheels. And that's important because while I wouldn't classify myself as a hookless fan, I'm hookless skeptic, I'll say. I do think that hookless will eventually take over. I think probably the reason for that is much like disc brakes, and that all the advantages aren't necessarily in the braking. There's a heck of a lot of opportunities that came from disc braking that probably forced through disc brakes, and I think hookless will go the same way, that there's probably other opportunities that maybe we know about, maybe we don't know about, but either way, I do think 15 years from now, hookless will either have entirely disappeared or will be entirely dominant in terms of a tubeless system. And I think it's worth pointing out that, from those other examples I've seen, the point of my article was trying to raise awareness that according to the new ISO standards, you should not be mounting 28mm tires on these rims, and that with that in mind, perhaps we need to rethink how we purchase and what type of tires we're looking for and what width of tires we're looking for when it comes to our hookless rims.
Right. So we've got quite a bit to unpack here. So just to recap, so we know what wheels he was running. We know what tire size and tire model and everything he was running. We know he was running I think it was a Vittoria Corsa Pro. I think it was a Vittoria Corsa of some variety, 28mm printed size. We know he was running a Vittoria foam road tire liner. Again, we don't know what tire pressure he was running. We don't know the conditions of the installation. We don't know if he actually hit something. So either way.
We know he had sealant also, because there was sealant everywhere.
Yes, there was sealant everywhere.
That sounds like a joke, but it actually is important also. He did have sealant in the system.
Yeah, because we have heard of teams sort of just like painting the inside of the tires with sealant just to run it like as absolutely light as possible. So yes, he definitely was running sealant or some sort of white milky substance in there. Anyway, all right. So either way, I guess the reason why this is concerning is because we certainly have seen back in the day tubulars come off of rims, that sort of thing, but not usually just kind of rolling in a straight line. And while this particular tire and wheel setup was technically incompatible, it's worth noting that it was only technically incompatible by 1 millimeter as far as the stated size. So the new ISO standards say that for a 25 mil internal rim, you have to be running at least a 29 mil stated size tire. Anyway, so pretty dramatic ending to this thing here. So either way, we have some potential issues that we've kind of alluded to a bunch in the past, but one big problem seems to be that we don't really know the motivations for why the team was running this particular combo. And as you noted, Ronan, this is not particularly unusual to see teams running a 25 mil internal with rim with a 28 mil tire. And if we're looking at it from a team perspective, the fact that this is supposed to be an area where the teams and the mechanics should, in theory, know, I guess, kind of best what should be safe and what isn't safe. The fact that this is happening seems pretty clear that it maybe is not as safe as it's maybe billed to be, or something's going on here.
I think we can assume the factors that are causing teams to use this combination, which is it's faster. Well, no, yes, but it's what's available through sponsors, right? So if they're sponsored by Zip, they only have access to let's say the 454, which is, I believe, a little bit narrower, or if they want the lightest weight wheel, they've got the 353, which is that 25 mil internal width. And then at that point, they've got, through their tire sponsor, they've got 28, or the next step up is 30. And on that rim, that 28 is probably already measuring 31 actual width, is my assumption. You get a 30 mil tire on that, you're then racing a road race.
There's actually a formula for working that out, and while I haven't measured its system, the formula would suggest that 28 would have measured 30.4, which is 2.4 millimeters larger than stated width.
Sure. So, and then, the next size up in tire is going to be closer to in the 32 range, which is getting pretty big for a general road race and probably bigger than the pros want to be on. So I think this is partly like sponsor restrictions that are probably forcing teams to want to err on the side of narrower to what they actually have access to, and therefore they're creating this combo that's not recommended.
Yeah, and to your point, James, about the mechanics, it's worth noting also, because we do lament the UCI often enough, we should also give credit where it's due. In December, they clearly reminded teams. Now, granted, it was World Tour teams, and a lot of were not currently a World Tour team, but they reminded World Tour teams who have also had failures this year that you need to be in keeping with ISO standards when it comes to tire width and a rim width. And from what I understand, also, not all the mechanics are entirely up to scratch or up to date on their ISO standards and tire width and rim width combinations. And it's probably unrealistic to expect that they should be. They're probably not paid enough to be keeping up with ISO standards. Let's put it that way.
Well, I think you could probably, I guess you could make that argument, but at the same time, I know the three of us are pretty familiar with what that chart says, but if we think about it, I mean, how many teams are there really? How many mechanics are there really? What does it really take to send a single communication out with just that one chart that says, hey, these are the internal rim widths and these are the tires that you can run with that? End of story.
I don't know if communications like that were sent, but I know when these types of conversations have happened in the past, that it's sort of it's not taken as seriously as it should be. I think there are examples where it's like the max torque in this thing is 4 Newton meters, and make sure you prep your torque wrench and only click it once, and then you watch the pro mechanic do it, and they'll have gone to 5 Newton meters and done it 4 times, and it's like, That's not the same thing.
Yeah, but I also think like the mechanics often just follow team orders, right? From the team technical directors or even from riders. And if the riders are being like, we're not racing every road race this season on Paris-Roubaix tire widths, right? Like that's the Roubaix setup that they're used to, and they're like, that's way too big. We don't want to be on that. End of the day, they're probably going to try skirt the rules in order to please the riders.
And that's, I think, where the problem originates, because if you were Thomas de Gent riding that stage in UAE last weekend and you looked at the stage, perfectly smooth surface, some of the best tarmac roads you're going to ride on all year, and you went on and you picked any of the online calculators and you put in your weight, you put in your system weight, you put in your tire width, it probably would have told them 80, 85 PSI, something like that, for the speeds that they're traveling at. It probably would have been a lot higher than the 72 PSI limit for a 28 mil hookless tire. And we don't know what happened, but it's highly plausible that the tires may have been overinflated, or even if they were right at the 72.5 PSI limit. Let's give the benefit of the doubt for a second, but if they were right at the limit, and he did happen to hit something, and then this tire width and inner rim width weren't matched the way they should be, it's very plausible that that spike in pressure from hitting something on the road could have caused the tire to blow off in that instance also. So, everything, and again, comes back to the point of this article, was everything could have been done right. It could have been right on the limit, and he had the misfortune of hitting something that exposed the weakness in the combination he was running at that split second.
Right, because I guess the crux of the issue here is that this shouldn't have happened at all, because I think the big thing that stands out for me is that, let's say, okay, yes, we know that it was a combination that was not approved. Let's just make the assumption he was running a little bit too much pressure. But the issue for me, I do run road tubeless, hookless on occasion. We've certainly heard from plenty of people who say like, oh, they've had no problems with it, so on and so forth. But the issue that that has always stuck out for me is just how narrow the safety margin is for how quickly things can go wrong. So just to recap, the way the guidelines are written, the maximum allowable tire pressure is, I think it's usually 72.5 PSI. Is that what we said?
It is 72.5 PSI, but as your tire width increases, that maximum pressure drops.
Right, like that's the highest it'll ever be. Mm-hmm. But the other thing is the safety margin is only 10%. So the way it's like the test, by my understanding, the test is stated such that combination, in order for it to be approved, has to withstand a pressure that's 10% above that rating. 10% above that rating is not very high. That's a pretty small safety margin.
Yep, especially when you consider that.
Well, it's 7 PSI if you're at the limit.
Yeah. And I can tell you, in testing quite a lot of floor pumps over the years with a lab verified gauge, a lot of floor pumps brand new measure outside of that 10% variance in terms of the gauge accuracy, and then add some age to that gauge, add some tire sealant into it, you're way off that. You're way outside that 10%. And I guess, that's the fundamental issue here, is that we're talking about a consumer level product that even if the consumer thinks they're doing everything right, even if they've researched and found an appropriate tire, they've matched the right width, these are all big assumptions to begin with, then even still their pump gauge could lead them astray. And at that point, the safety margin, you go over that safety margin, we're not talking about like a tire that deflates itself, we're talking about a tire that explodes.
Let me just back up just a little bit, just to be perfectly clear. I mean, as much as we all have some misgivings and concerns about hookless for the road, I don't think that the concept in and of itself is inherently flawed, because I mean, as hookless brands and hookless proponents will point out, and I guess rightfully so, pretty much every wheeled vehicle on the planet uses a hookless rim. But the issue for me here is that there are so many more particulars about bicycle wheels and tires, in particular, kind of like high performance road stuff, that I can't think of anything else where the requirements are so almost over the top as far as what we're expecting what we're expecting of a wheel and tire system on a bicycle. Like we want it to be, lightweight. We want it to be reasonably priced. We want it to be able to be installed by hand and removed by hand. We want it to be able to be inflated with a floor pump. We want it to be, puncture resistant and so on and so forth. Like we want it to do all these things, but we also need it to be safe, right? Like if I go to have a car tire installed, I'm not doing that at home. Like if I have a bunch of buddies who ride motorcycles, they can change their tires, but they have a big jig to do that. They can kind of do it out on the trail if they have to, but it's
an effort.
It's an ordeal. But the other thing for me is just like the level of education that's clearly been required with the transition to hookless, because we still hear all the time now, hookless has been around for, I don't know, several years now, but there's still so much confusion as far as what kind of tires you're supposed to be using, what kind of pressures you're supposed to be running, that sort of thing. Like we still hear all the time about people running, I can run 25 mil rims with 28 mil tires and pump them up to 100 PSI. Dear God, please don't do that. So it almost seems like it's a question to me of just the industry almost moving a little too fast and not waiting for things to kind of catch up a little bit.
Yeah, I also think we're talking about a somewhat fringe case here. Like hookless off-road makes perfect sense, where tires are wider, pressures are lower. Mountain bike, gravel, zero problems there. In consumer road, hookless also makes sense when you're talking about people running 32 mil tire widths and their body weight is within the realms of what hookless road was intended for. And they're, say, running 50, 60 PSI. So they're nowhere near that 72 PSI limit. But then when you get to the performance end of road, where there are still pressure calculators that are suggesting that you run above 70-ish PSI, and you're ideally better suited to narrower tire widths, for me, the tech just doesn't make sense yet. Or maybe it never will, and it's being pushed into the World Tour. And I just think that, it's not an appropriate tech when we're flying that close to the sun on these things.
I mean, I do wonder if we're going to see continued advancements on the tire side that might at some point allow a combination like that, but it doesn't seem like we're there yet. Because just generally speaking, if you look at like a cross-section of a tire of that size and a rim of that size, there's just not that much holding the tire on there, really. But I mean, I guess coming back to my point, so, and like you were saying, Dave, I mean, when everything is correct, when you're kind of within the safety margin, I guess, it seems to be fine.
Yeah. I wouldn't even say it seems to be fine. I'd say it is fine, right? Like on gravel, if you're running 30 PSI on a hookless wheel, I mean, you don't see...
We're getting cringe face from Ronan.
You're adding caveats, Dave.
Okay.
You're adding caveats.
All right.
I will say, I want to come back to add to your list of the requirements that we expect of a road tire. But before I do so, I will say that one of my hesitations about hookless now is that, from what I understand, and I haven't experienced this myself, but from what I understand, we don't even have a way to identify if a rim that we're looking at is within the exact requirements and the exact spec needed to retain a hookless tire perfectly. And one of the issues there is that the rim might actually, from what I understand, measure perfectly, but in service, under pressure from an inflated tire, some rims may actually flex to a point where the tire, that can actually aid the tire in blowing off. Now, I'm pretty confident in saying that's not what happened with the Ghent, because I think zip rims are not, you're not going to experience that with zip rims. I'm pretty confident in saying that.
And as Dave has noted, they've gotten heavier.
Yes, and we don't know if that's related or not, but I mean, you could put two and two together and get 4, you could put two and two together and get 5 there. But either way, that's one of the concerns I have about hookless right now. And that's why I said in my article that I would continue to ride hookless rims from reputable manufacturers, and what is reputable is probably subjective. That's very difficult to answer here. But going back to your point, David or James, about what we expect of road tires, you have to also add into the mix that end users expect to be able to, and probably rightly so, walk into a bike shop and say, I want X tire, and I want to be able to run it whatever pressure I want, and I want to be able to run it on the rims that I have. And I think that's pretty important to remember also, because what I learned, and I've been sort of researching this hookless topic for about a month or so now. I haven't been aware of it for years, but really delving into it for the past month or so, that the 25 and the 28 mil tires we run mostly on the road are designed around a 19 millimeter rim. And so while they might work up to 23, and with the 23 millimeter internal rim, they're up to something. Well, I don't actually have the figures to hand right now, but let's say it's 29 and a half or something. They're just under 30 mil.
You're referring to the design rim width.
Yeah. Whereas when you go up to 25, you're getting that increase again. And there is a very strict limit in terms of, it's like plus or minus 2 millimeters, that a 28 mil tire must measure under 30 and above 26. And part of what I wrote in the article was also missed was that if you go for an older, extremely narrow rim, you're going to end up on the too small side of what a 28 mil tire should measure, which I ran into with a rim last week. It was right on the limit. A 28 should be plus or minus 2 millimeters. This 28 tire on a 18.5 mil internal rim was 26, which is bang on the lower limit. Now, it wasn't a hookless setup, but still, I'm like, my teeth are my responsibility. And I don't need to be taking those risks. The point I'm trying to get to is that there are standards, regardless of the type of tire or the tubeless system we're running. There are standards that do exist, and we need to adhere to them. And the standards are not a target. 72.5 PSI is not a target. It's a limit. And a 29 mil tire on a 25 internal rim is not a target. It's an upper limit. And my rule of thumb going forward will be minimum 30, potentially minimum 32 millimeter tire on a 25 internal rim. And I'm going to aim for like mid 50s or 60 PSI. Like, as I said, they're limits, not targets.
Well, and again, I guess the reason why it's probably smart for you to have that attitude is, again, because the safety margins are so small. I think all three of us are used to, and I think this is kind of inherent to enthusiast cyclists in general, anyone who likes to tinker with their gear. Like, people are used to having a certain degree of freedom with being able to kind of mix and match and play with stuff and kind of like push the limits a little bit. And typically when you push the limits and you push the limits a little bit too far, stuff maybe just doesn't work all that great. Like, your shifting is maybe not all that great, like something just like doesn't handle right or whatever. We're not generally used to having it be like a safety problem when you push the limit a little bit too far, like, in particular, tire blowing off. I mean, Dave, I know you and I have both experienced this, like in the early days of tubeless mountain bike, when, certainly well before there were any sort of real standards with, or at least any standards that anyone adhered to anyway, before there were any real standards there with regard to tires and rims and stuff. I mean, we saw tire blow-offs all the time, because people were running like super lightweight tires that weren't designed for tubeless, and like, running these kind of jerry-rigged rim setups, and like we just saw all sorts of crazy stuff. And thankfully, most of the time when those tires blew off, it didn't result in a super terrible crash, because generally speaking, crashes off-road are not as bad as when you're on the road. Yep. But point being, we do have this technically accepted standard on the road with respect to hookless, and yet there still is an issue to my eye, mainly because the margins are so small. I would love to see those margins expanded. I don't know if that's going to happen, because just at the glacial pace that ISO or ETRTO standards change, but that would be my wish.
Is it even possible? Like, is it just that because we're relying on like I
think
friction,
it's possible.
Basically.
No, but I mean, I do think it's possible, and I don't think it's necessarily friction, because the thing is, when everything is set up properly, essentially what you are dealing with is you are relying on the tire bead to not stretch beyond a certain point under pressure. So if you have that set up, and if the tire bead is shaped in a way that properly seals up against the side of the rim and that sort of thing, all those things being what they're supposed to be, that tire should not come off. But the issue, again, if you have such a narrow safety margin, you could very well have a tire that passes those standards, that does everything it's supposed to do based on how things are written, and it could still be a problem if, again, you have a tire, you have a pressure gauge that isn't quite dead on, or you're trying to push things just a little bit too much, or whatever. To me, it just seems like the safety margins are too narrow. There's too much education required. There's just too much confusion in the marketplace from consumers.
I just keep returning to the fact that I just think 25 mil internal width hookless wheels are dumb for pure road purposes. I think, again, it should be sold as a gravel product or an all-road product, but as soon as you're talking about the general consumer wanting to run smaller than a 32 millimeter tire width on this rim, and you're talking about flying that close to the sun at speeds that could be deadly, I just think this is a very irresponsible category of product. And I'm not singling out any brands here because there's quite a few brands that are doing this at the moment, but I just think, it's just incredibly foolish. And I think if you were to look at like the aeronautical industry and say, aircraft, right? If we were to load the aircraft with 300 customers and the seating capacity is 300, at that point, there's if there's too much luggage, the plane might fall out of the sky, within 10%. Not a single person is going to get on that plane. I think, it's just comes back to the fact that I just don't agree with us playing with fire with having such a small margin of error on this. And I think, if you look back, like brands like Cadex, they used to test their tires to 2x the pressure rating from memory. I think it was like, if it said 72 psi max, they were roughly testing it at about 140-ish. And if that combo failed, it didn't meet their standards. I think that's what everyone in the industry should be doing. And I think that's what the ISO should require. And I think that's where we should be.
I 100% agree, but I will also say that comes back to our expectations on tires. And if we weren't looking to run 28 mil tires with these rims on the road, if we were happy to run 32s, I don't think the issue would exist. And if we weren't looking to exceed 72 psi, either, for whatever reason we want to exceed it, if we weren't looking to exceed it, I don't think the issue would exist either. So I keep coming back to that, if, as I said in the article, if the answer that you're looking for in terms of tire performance is a 28 mil tire, the answer that you're not looking for with a wheel is a 25 millimeter internal rim. And if you choose one or the other, you can't choose the other, is the point that I made.
Do we think this is kind of the result, I guess almost predictable result, you could say, of the industry or teams, riders, consumers, whatever? Do you think this is potentially the result of some element of the bicycle world pushing too hard for performance gains? Because that's ultimately why people are trying to run this combo, probably, right? Well, I mean, Dave, as you mentioned, it is potentially a result of sponsorship restrictions and that sort of thing. But again, like, Zip and whoever else, the reason why they have 25 mil internal tubeless straight side road wheels is because they are saying there is a performance advantage, right? Like, are we trying to push things too far?
Well, I mean, like this, if we were being cynical, we would say it's not actually that it's a cost saving measure, which arguably it is also. Well, not
I'm
arguably,
so
it
not
is
cynical,
also.
Ronan. I'm totally not cynical.
It is also
Never.
a cost saving measure for the manufacturers, and the cynical amongst us may say that the performance gains are secondary and sort of a marketing method for the tubeless or the hookless system. But I'll come back to what I said at the start. I think hookless will take over in 15 years' time. Again, they either have disappeared because, I don't know, the UCI will have stepped in and banned it, or, God forbid, something actually dreadful will have happened that will just cause a wake-up call that will mean, okay, there may be performance gains here, there may be financial gains here, but it's not worth it. We're going back to hooks. Or the other is that there are, and bear with me here, I'm not saying I'm chasing these, or I'm not saying we should be chasing these, but there are potentially aerodynamic gains. I think there are definitely gains in terms of ride feel and grip, and I think there are potentially gains in terms of decreased rolling resistance. And if those four things, if we want to keep chasing those, that's another reason why I think hookless will prevail. But I mean, no good going fast if you're hitting the deck when your tire comes off.
Well, that just makes hitting the deck worse.
Faster.
Right? Well, yes. Well, this is definitely not a topic that we are going to put to bed today. I'm pretty sure that this is something that we are going to be continuing to talk about in the future moving forward, because I'm pretty sure this is maybe closer to the beginning of the discussion, not the end of it. Ronan, let's update your title. You will be our chief optimization and maybe also safety officer. I'm not really sure what the acronym for that would be now. I lost track of the letters.
Fire warden.
Yeah, I don't know.
Either way, Ronan, it is quite late for you. We've pulled you away because you are on site at an event right now. So we're going to let you go back to doing your thing.
I'm going to bed, to be honest with you. So
I'm quite envious of you actually, because it's a 2:45 p.m. my time here in Colorado, and I actually would like to go to bed myself. So
I'm going to go and dream about TSS and 622s and 28s and 30s and 25s and ARWs and.
Just
Excellent.
wake,
Did I say
just
dream?
wake
I
up
meant
in
to
a
say
cold
nightmare.
sweat
Sorry,
and go, oh
I
no,
meant to say
it
nightmare.
wasn't a dream.
all right, well, Ronan, we'll have you back on another episode soon. Go do your thing. Off to bed.
Adios. Ciao.
All right, let's take a quick break here, and then we'll come back for the rest of the show.
Everyone, whether you were a bike shop owner or a sandwich shop, your first reaction was, holy smokes, I'm going to have to close my business.
In the weeks leading up to COVID closures, we actually had a dumpster catch fire inside of our primary warehouse.
Either every existing bicycle owner has to buy another one in the next 5 years, or the entire third world has to walk into the playing field and start buying high-end bicycles.
All right, what you heard right there was just a snippet of a series of industry podcasts from Escape Collective founder Wade Wallace that he recently recorded that looked into the current post-COVID bust phase that the bike industry finds itself in right now, kind of how bad it is really right now, how we got here, and kind of where things go at this point. If you want more from that episode or from the series of 4 episodes, actually, and I think you definitely should because they're really good to listen to, head over to your favorite podcast app, search for Escape Collective, and then scroll down to Overnight Success to hear those episodes in full. All right, back to Geek Warning. Dave, what you got on your mind this week?
On my mind is one very nice looking bike from Baum out of Victoria in Australia, and yeah, he's the Solaris, and he's basically obsessively been working away at hiding cables on his bikes, and he's sort of had some pretty strong thoughts over the years that I've spoken to him at the various handmade shows about why he wasn't offering internal cabled bikes. And last year he teased, showed me in a back room, he showed me a prototype that he was working on, and yeah, he's now come out with it. And basically the idea is to offer a classically styled bike without an oversized head tube. So it's a regular tapered head tube. It's running a regular Chris King headset. It's running a regular stem. It's running a regular handlebar. But yeah, there's just no hoses to be seen. And basically how he's done it is the hoses run through the stem, and then the steerer tube, which is actually just a regular off-the-shelf Envy fork, is customized with like a slot down the front face of it at the top of the steerer. That's then reinforced with a custom 3D printed titanium insert that is bonded in place, so that gives like structural reinforcement to the slotted steerer and also guides those hoses. And then there's some secret little exit holes as well for the front and rear brake hose. Very, very clean looking. It's also a design idea that a few others have stumbled around. Woods Bicycle Co., another Australian group, they showed a bike at the Handmade Show last year with kind of a similar idea. And Stelville is another one that actually came out with such a thing in, I think it was 2022. They also had slotted a steerer tube. Different to how Baum's done it, but similar concept in that you've got a little slot in the front of the steerer tube to accept the hoses into the steerer. So yeah, that's kind of on my mind, and what mostly is on my mind with it is that the safety factor here is not one to mess with. And speaking with Darren Baum on this, they broke a lot of forks getting to this design. And yeah, I mean he's had, he's good friends with Raoul Lucia, the carbon expert, and Raul's definitely had his hands on this project and has helped with the testing of it. But I would say it worries me on the idea that some may copy this without quite understanding how dangerous this could be.
I've got a round file in my hand, Dave. I can do this at home, right?
And you got lots of bikes in the background. Start testing.
So all I have to do is slot the steer tube, right?
Pretty
Good to
much.
go?
Yeah, just a file.
Okay, good.
Yeah, just
Noted.
maybe a sawzall if you're time poor.
So, Dave, is this a good idea?
I think it looks super clean, and I absolutely love how this Baum looks. I think it's one of the nicest looking metal bikes on the market. And I trust that Darren and his team have created a product that actually is safe. I think, yeah, there's a lot to love here. But yeah, my worry is more that others adopting this style or copying this style without fully understanding just how precise you need to be with these modifications, and that normally drilling holes into steerer tubes may not be the safest thing unless you have broken a lot of forks to understand how to do it.
And made a custom 3D printed titanium plug to go in there to reinforce the whole thing.
Yep. So yeah, I think that's on my mind, is that there's a lot of pretty bikes out there, but I think I just encourage brands that if they're wanting to go this way to please run this through ISO testing, do drop tests on your products, and be confident that this is a safe way to go before committing to the aesthetic advantage.
Are we basically accepting at this point that fully hidden cable routing is just sort of how things are now?
Pretty much.
Is this done? Like, this seems like a done deal.
I think it's a done deal. I think the fight against it still can be had off-road. I think we're seeing some brands that you would assume would go internal, or have in fact gone internal on some bikes, are understanding the market forces are saying no. And I think there's still hope in that space. And I think like looking behind me, I've got a Santa Cruz Stigmata gravel bike on test, and that's external of the headset. And I think I encourage consumers to actively decide with their wallets on these things. Like, if you just were to stop buying gravel bikes that had internal cable routing, I think we'd see a reversal of it. But I think the road market is a done deal. I think the sales are strong enough now to indicate that that's what people want. And unfortunately, I think the days of having cables external of the headset on road bikes is limited, and is basically going to be the domain of custom builders.
All right. Well, I guess that officially cements my status as, I guess now a Luddite, or a grumpy old man, or Homer Simpson's dad, yelling at clouds.
Yeah. And I think it's worth mentioning, like, Baum Cycles and pretty much every other custom builder that does internal cabling, you don't have to do it. For Baum, it's an optional extra. It remains an optional extra. Like, I think you'd still encourage and perhaps be very happy to have the hose external of the headset whenever you're willing to. So and I think the more people that perhaps refuse to buy a carbon bike that have the hoses hidden with through the headset, and rather pick a steel or titanium bike with the hoses external, the more the industry might take notice. The big brands.
I guess the reality is, stranger things have happened. I mean, we have seen a reversal from press fit bottom brackets back to threaded. I think to a large extent. So who knows? We'll see. I guess it just depends on how big the consumer backlash is. Let's just see how big people's service bills are in a few years. Mm-hmm. Speaking of service bills, let's move on to our PSA for this week. Dave, you put something in here in the show notes that I am curious to hear, because you said your PSA this week is the only good fix for contaminated brake pads, which I have a feeling I know what that is.
Yeah, you probably do know what it is. So there's a lot of solutions to contaminated brake pads. If you look around the internet, there's brake cleaners, there's specific products that claim to draw oils out. There's creme brulee torches that people use to burn the oils off. There's putting them in the oven and sticking out your whole house and upsetting the family. The list goes on. And I can say I've tried them all, some with varying success. But even the creme brulee torch, there's still going to be, if you have contaminated brake pads, there's still going to be oils trapped within that pad. It kind of soaks it up like a sponge. And even burning the pad to the point that you're at risk of basically delaminating the braking surface away from the backing plate, even then, you're still basically going to have that oil creep back to the surface soon enough. And so the answer is you replace your pads and rotors. That is the only way to correctly fix a truly contaminated brake that is, say, squealing or just won't be quiet. It's to replace things. And that,
oh, wow. I mean, I'm with you on the replacing the pads thing, but you're advocating to replace the rotors as well, huh?
Yep. I don't believe you can get a rotor clean enough that it won't then recontaminate the pads.
Interesting.
Yeah. Because, that rotor's not like, you look at it and you think it's a smooth steel surface, but it's actually quite textured. And if you put it under a microscope, there's lots of valleys and troughs in that steel. Getting all the oils out of that to have a perfectly clean rotor is a difficult thing to do. The only guaranteed way to fix contaminated brake is to replace both. And I'd also recommend ensuring that before you do that you don't have like leaky pistons causing said contaminated brake, because then that's just wasting even more money. But yeah, so that unfortunately is the PSA, is if you've got oil on your brake, whether it's from, cleaning it wrongly or degreasing your chain wrongly, or whether it's you've ridden through an oil patch on the road and it's flicked up and gotten on your rotor, the only guaranteed way to fix it is to replace stuff.
Dave, that sounds very expensive.
Yep. Nobody said disc brake road bikes or disc brakes are cheap.
All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and head on to eBay and look for my externally routed rim brake road bike here. Here I go.
This episode is just like, the entire episode has just been like, don't ride tubeless, don't ride disc brakes, and don't hide your cables. It's just, this entire episode is buy a road bike from 2010.
Oh my. Well, we're getting pretty long here. Let's go ahead and just finish up with the rest of our little news bits for the week. All right. In other wheel news, Cadex. I know Cadex won't particularly like this, but I guess it's safe to say they are sort of like the premium wheel and component sub-brand of Giant. They've got some new road wheels called the Max 40. They're super light. They're sub 1,250 grams for, I think they are hookless, actually.
Yep.
Clincher disc brake wheels. Cadex claims these offer, quote, best in class, unquote, stiffness to weight, but they're still really aero, supposedly, with a 40 mil deep rim. And Cadex carbon fiber super aero. That's capital S and capital A carbon fiber spokes.
That's very aero.
Cadex also has a couple of new integrated one-piece carbon fiber road cockpits, one specifically designed to be lightweight, the other one to be more aero. And they got some new road tires, too. So you can check all that out at Cadex Cycling or cadex-cycling.com if you're interested in seeing more of that. We actually don't have any of this stuff on hand yet. And then in more wheel and tire stuff, Vittoria's got some new tires for road riders that want something especially durable for year-round riding. These new tires are called Ride Armor, which gives you, I think, a pretty good idea of what they're meant to do. Built with a nylon casing with an extra layer on the sidewalls. They got another layer at the bead to protect against chafing at the rim. It's got bead-to-bead puncture protection belt and a thicker graphene and silica-infused rubber tread cap for longer wear. So Vittoria is only making these in wider sizes primarily, all 700C diameters from 26 to 38 mil. Tubeless compatibility throughout with hookless on everything from 28 mil and up. 60 euros retail. Sounds like those might be pretty decent training tires.
And an embargo date of the 29th of Feb. You don't see that very often.
How about that, right?
Wow.
I will also say that when I made I'm about to head back over to Asia for combination family and business trip. And when I made those arrangements, I requested a February 28th departure date, thinking that I'd be arriving on March 1st. Oh, oops, I forgot. Leap year. Right. So I'm going to be getting there just a little bit early, but that's okay. That's okay. All right. Well, that'll do it for this week's episode of Geek Warning. Before we close, a couple of little pieces of news of our own. Pretty big news, I think, because we're hiring. More specifically, we're hoping to add a tech writer to our team since there's only so much ground the three of us can cover. So if you've ever dreamed of becoming part of what we're doing here at Escape Collective and being at the cutting edge of the bike industry, toiling in front of your computer all day, working long hours for mediocre pay and no benefits, and never actually getting to ride your bike, head over to escapecollective.com/careers to learn more and see how to apply. How was that pitch, Dave?
Did
Convincing?
not sell that very well at all. Wow.
Well,
Wow.
you know, I like to under promise and over deliver, right? I mean,
Oh my.
it can't be all roses, right? I mean, it's a job.
Yeah, it's a pretty good job there.
But seriously, we are looking for somebody if you think you might be up to snuff, if you think you know your bike stuff, if you can write, you can take pictures, if you can make a good argument, head over to that careers page and figure out how to apply and send that stuff over to me. And then if you prefer to stay on the other side of the screen, maybe even at your workbench, make sure to sign up for Dave's Tools and Workshop newsletter, Threaded, which you can always find right on escapecollective.com, but is even better when it gets delivered straight into your inbox. And if your thing is more figuring out how to go just a little bit faster, maybe shave that just wee bit of time from your ride, check out Ronan's Performance Process podcast. That one's only available in full to our Escape Collective members, so head over to escapecollective.com/join to sign up for a membership if you want more than just the teaser episodes. And speaking of signing up, I also just want to remind you that we are now fully committed to being a 100% member-funded operation here at Escape Collective, meaning we work for you, not for advertisers, and aside from us constantly battering you to sign up for a membership, you'll never see any annoying pop-up ads or pitches or affiliate links or whatever. So if you're not a member, what are you waiting for? I mean, you want a personal invitation or something? All right, fine. Here you go. Like, Thomas, you, Thomas. We know you are not a member, so quit freeloading and give us a solid, eh? All right. Thanks as always for listening.
Very Aussie of you.
All right. Well, thanks as always for listening. We'll see you next week for another episode of Geek Warning.
Cheers.